Hey everyone, I'm Josh with J&T's Journey, and today I'm going to give you an overview of the power system in the A Frame AVans. Hey everyone, I'm Josh with J&T's Journey, and in today's video I'm going to take you through the basic components of all of the various different power systems within an A Frame AVan. So a lot of people get confused by how the AVan power system works. Some people assume that because the AVan has a battery that the 240 volt power points will always work, that when you plug the camper in, when you're towing it, that it will charge off the car. I want to dispel a few of those myths and just explain what are the different power systems within the AVan and how are they hooked up. Now before I get started, I do want to say I'm talking about a standard AVan, right? So this is as they come off the factory floor, wired from the factory. Now there are a few different factory options that you can have these fitted with, which do change the way the power systems work slightly, but generally speaking, they all come off the factory floor the same. However, a lot of people have modified their AVans. A lot of people have added the ability to charge while they're towing. A lot of people have changed the solar setup, added inverters, done modifications, etc. Now we're not in our AVan today because our AVan is not standard. We've been kindly allowed to use a friend of ours AVan for the purpose of producing this content for you guys. So without further ado, let's get into the various different power systems within an AVan. Just before we get started, I want to quickly say that this video is being produced for entertainment purposes only, and any actions undertaken as a result of information contained in this video is the responsibility of the individuals undertaking the action. The first question, how many power systems are there in an AVan? Well, again, it does depend a little bit on the factory modifications that have been applied and how they've been wired up or how they've been modified over time. But as they roll off the factory floor, there are essentially 4 main aspects to the power systems within an AVan, and it all starts down here at the drawbar. So the first power system that you have in an AVan starts with the 2 plugs that come from factory on this drawbar here. Now sometimes there is a third red plug, and I'll talk about a little bit about what that does in a minute. So the first power system that we're going to talk about is the trailer plug. Generally speaking, AVans come from the factory with the trailer plug wired to the towing systems only. Now what do I mean by the towing systems? This connector runs your brake lights, it runs your indicators, it runs the electric brakes on the hubs on the wheels of the van. That is, as wired from standard, all this connector does. It doesn't provide power to your fridge. It doesn't charge the van on the fly. It doesn't do anything other than run the towing accessories. That is the things that your vehicle needs to provide to your camper in order to run the lights, the brakes, and the primary systems associated with towing the van. If you're having issues with your indicators, if you're having issues with your brakes, if you're having issues with your brake lights or your parkers, this connector is where it all starts, and this is the connector that plugs into your car that runs all of those systems. Now on the front of the drawbar, usually we have a second connector, and most of them these days will have an Anderson connector. Some older AVans will have a separate plug on the front of them for this, but generally speaking, most of them will have an Anderson connector on the drawbar. As wired from factory, this Anderson connector provides 12 volt power to run your fridge in transit. Now that being said, you do need to make sure that your fridge is set to the correct mode in order to keep the fridge cool in transit. Now this is not something that you want to be powering the fridge from all the time, especially not off grid, because 12 volt powering the fridge uses a a lot of power. When you're off grid, you should absolutely be running the fridge on gas. We'll pop inside the camper. I'll quickly show you where the 12 volt setting is on the fridge, and then we'll talk about the next power system within the AVan, which is the 240 volt system. All right, rounding out the power system for the fridge with that Anderson connector on the drawbar. When you're traveling in transit, you do want to make sure that your fridge is set to 12 volts. Now, the exact details on how to set this depend on the type of fridge that you have fitted. Always refer to the owner's manual for your fridge if there is any question about how to set that mode. For example, this AVan I think is a 2019 model, and it has a Thetford fridge with a manual power selection here. Now, to switch this to 12 volts, you simply rotate the mode selector until you get to the battery symbol, which is the 12 volt connector on the Anderson plug. Please be aware that battery symbol, as they're wired standard, does not mean the fridge will run off the battery on the van when it's not plugged into the car. If your van has been wired up to work that way, be aware that if you're off grid and you switch it to battery and it does draw from the battery in the camper, or you put a battery box on the drawbar, this fridge will run that battery flat in only a few hours. So when you're off grid, running the fridge on gas is your best option, and it's also the most efficient option to run the fridge when you're off grid. All right, now let's talk about the 240 volt system, but to talk about that, we've got to start outside. Now that we're outside, let's talk about the 240 volt system in the camper. Now you can see here, the lead on this camper has already been withdrawn. Now the first thing I will say about the 240 volt system is if you're going to plug your camper in, as the sticker here suggests, make sure that the lead is fully withdrawn. If the lead is not fully withdrawn and you plug in high current devices or turn the hot water service on, that kind of thing, if the cable is coiled up inside the camper, it can get hot and it can be a fire risk. So always make sure that cable is fully withdrawn. In this case here, the camper has already been set up, the cable is already withdrawn, and it's plugged into shore power to keep the camper running and to keep the camper fully charged while it's in storage. I strongly advocate for that. If you haven't already checked out our video on that topic, do check the link in the description, go have a look at that video. Now, in order to show you what the 240 volt powers, we're going to have to pop back inside and we'll talk a little bit about where the 240 volt goes in the camper, what the 240 volt does power, and what the 240 doesn't. The first thing you need to know about the 240 volt system in the camper is that first and foremost, the 240 volt cable runs into your main circuit breaker. Now, this camper has the 1D layout, which means that the bed is at the rear, there's a dinette at the front, and the kitchen is in the middle. Now, the exact location of this circuit breaker will vary depending on the age of your camper. Some of them are underneath the bed, near where the power cable comes in. Some are within the kitchen cupboards, depending on the layout. In the 1D, like this one, and the one that we have, the circuit breaker is located in the dinette area. Now think of this circuit breaker like your master switch. Now this is a safety breaker, so if there are any faults with the camper in the 240 volt system, this breaker will trip. Be aware though, this only affects the 240 volts within the camper. The 12 volt system, which we'll talk about in a minute, has other protections in other places. This is just your first line of defense when looking at the 240 volt system. Now the cable that comes into the camper is wired first and foremost through this. Now there are a few variations on this. In some of the newer campers that have the air conditioner fitted, there's sometimes two individual breakers here. One will run the main power points for the whole van and the other one will run the air conditioner. Sometimes on some of the older vans like this one, there's just one main breaker. The operation of this breaker is fairly simple. If the breaker is pushed up, the 240 volt power to the camper is on. If the breaker has fallen down, the 240 volt power within the camper has been turned off. Always make sure to test the breaker on a regular basis, and you can do that by pushing the little button on the breaker, and if you push that button and the breaker trips, the breaker is in good working order. If you're plugged into mains power, make sure that if you want to run the fridge, that the fridge is set to your mains power setting. Again, this will vary depending on the model of fridge that you have installed in your camper. Always refer to the owner's manual for correct operation of the fridge. So, what does the 240 volts power within the camper? Well, the 240 volts powers the individual 240 volt power points within the camper. It will power the fridge, if the fridge is set to run off AC, the microwave, the hot water service, if the hot water service is plugged in and turned on, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a sec, and if you have one fitted, the air conditioner or any other 240 volt accessories that you have in the camper. Now I do want to stipulate, the lights in the camper do not run off 240 volts. The lights in the camper run off the battery, and we will talk a little bit more about the battery and the importance of the 12 volt system and keeping the 12 volt system maintained in a minute. Now in the case of this camper, the owner has labelled all of the individual cables that are plugged into the various accessories around the van. I strongly recommend taking this approach and finding wherever they are within your layout where the 240 volt cables are, tracing them all and making sure that you label all of them. When the camper is in storage, it is a good idea to turn the 240 volt power to the hot water service off, especially if you drain the water tank when the camper is in storage. If you don't turn the hot water service off while the camper is in storage and there's no water in the tank, you can risk the hot water service running dry and causing damage to itself from the hot water service being plugged in while it's in storage. In this camper, the 240 volt outlets and in the 1D layout in general are located on the kitchen side of the camper, just underneath the bed. We personally also like to have the microwave turned off when we're not using it because the lights in the microwave are quite bright and they can be quite distracting at night. As you can see here, the 240 volt accessories, while the AVan is in storage, have all been turned off except for the 240 volt charger to keep the battery topped up. This is the best way to store the van when the 240 volt cable is plugged in so that your 240 volt accessories don't draw unnecessary power from 240 volts and you don't risk having your hot water service run dry. Before we get into the DC portion of the video, I just quickly want to pause to say, if you haven't already, can you please like, subscribe and share the video. We're just about to, or maybe have just passed 800 subscribers. We'd really like to get to 1,000 before the end of the year. So we really need your help. Please hit that like, subscribe and share buttons so that we can get our content out to as many people as possible. If you want to help us on our journey, help fund videos like this, please consider a YouTube membership. For only a few dollars a month, you will get priority access to comments, early access to the videos, you'll get access to most of our content about a week before it's published, and you'll also go on our leaderboard. All right, now that we're under the bed, let's talk about the final power system within the AVan, and that is the 12 volt system. The 12 volt system starts under the bed, and it starts right in this very back corner, again in the 1D layout, with the battery. The 12 volt system in the camper supplies power to all of the 12 volt accessories around the van. So the next question becomes, what are the 12 volt accessories? Well, these are things like your water pump, the lights in the camper, any USB outlets that you might have. If you've got an Adventure Plus, like this one, with the stereo fitted, the stereo, and any other 12 volt outlets, USBs, or additional things that you may have had fitted to your camper. Now, the 12 volt system is the system that is subject to the most modification. So if you're not sure about how your particular AVan is wired, I strongly suggest finding a local auto electrician or caravan repairer to have a quick look through your van and clarify how your system is wired. As standard, all of the lights, the water pump run off the battery. Now there is a mains charger fitted in the AVans, but there's a catch. Most of the mains chargers that are installed in an AVan are an intelligent charger. They're a multi-stage charger designed to enhance the life of the battery and get the longest life out of that battery that is fitted in your AVan. Now, in order for that charger to work properly, it needs to be able to see the battery. So if you run the battery completely flat, like, for example, leaving the camper in storage, not plugged into power, with the battery still hooked up to everything else in the camper, there's going to be a small amount of parasitic drain. And if that battery goes dead flat, you can plug your camper into mains power and that charger won't recognize the battery and won't start charging the battery. Now, depending on the charger that you have fitted, there are a few options that you can utilize in order to get that battery charged again. In the 1D layout, the standard battery charger is located down here underneath the bed. Now, this is a projector charger, so this is one of the more modern chargers. Now, if your battery goes flat, what do? Well, what you can do is if you come down on the front here, you will see that the battery charger has a whole bunch of different modes listed here. Now, where these are laid out on the front panel does change a little bit with the age of the charger, but most of these are the same. Now, if the battery charger is sitting on one of these modes here, so in this case the van is running an AGM battery, so the AGM mode has been selected, but if the battery's gone completely flat, what will end up happening is that power on light will just start flashing and neither the charging or the fully charged light will be lit. Now, if you're in the situation where your lights in your AVan aren't working and this charger is sitting here with the light flashing, what you can do is you can toggle the mode until you get to the power supply mode. Now, what does it do in power supply mode? In power supply mode, this goes from being a charger that needs to see the battery in order to put out power to being a power supply, which means it will ignore whether or not it can see the battery and it will just start outputting power. Now, this can be used for a period, say half an hour or so, to attempt to get your battery to recover from a dead flat charge. After half an hour, toggle the charger back to whatever mode you had it on previously, which in this case is AGM. And if the charger doesn't kick on and starts charging with the charging light, then you know that you have a bigger fault with your battery that needs to be addressed. So that's all good and well. What are your options if you don't have a modern projector charger like the one fitted to this AVan? Well, unfortunately, the news for you guys is not really that good. If your battery has gone completely flat, you need to get it charged somehow. Now, there are a few ways that you can trick some of the chargers into detecting the battery. If you have a jump starter pack for a car, you can remove the top of the battery box, you can connect the jump starter pack to the battery, and that may allow the charger to recognize the battery and start charging. Please be aware though, if you do connect a jump starter pack to the battery, you may need to leave it connected for 5 to 10 minutes in order for the charger to continue charging when you remove the jump starter from the battery. Likewise, if you've got a long enough set of jumper leads, what you can do is hook the jumper leads up to the battery, hook the jumper leads up to the car, and give the battery a boost charge from the jumper leads for 5 to 10 minutes. Your third option is to remove the battery and have it charged by another charger externally or sit it next to the car and charge it with a set of jumper leads. However, there's no real guarantee that if your battery has gone completely flat, that any of these methods will work. Batteries do not like going flat, and if you run them completely dead and attempt to charge them, and if at any point in time you start to smell like a rotten egg smell, that's a gas called hydrogen sulfide. It is extremely explosive, it is extremely dangerous, and it can asphyxiate you. If at any point while you're trying to recover a failed battery, you smell hydrogen sulfide, stop immediately. Disconnect the battery, remove it from the camper, and go and buy a new battery. The battery is toast. If you have an AVan fitted with a solar panel, then this constitutes part of your 12-volt system. The solar panel will, as long as it's in the sun, generally speaking, keep a trickle charge into the camper while the camper is in the sun. This camper is fitted with, I believe, the 80-watt solar panel, and this one is actually also fitted with the DC-DC charger, which means that although most AVans will not charge while they're towing, this one will. This is a factory option that you can have added or something aftermarket. However, as standard, be aware that the campers do not charge from the Anderson connector on the drawbar. There are a few different types of solar chargers that are fitted. This is the DC-DC solar charger combo. There are also other PWM-based cheaper units that get mounted inside the electrical bay within the camper, and your mileage may vary on these. The final thing to check if you're having issues with your 12-volt system, specifically if you've got confusing issues like the charger is saying it's not charging or the lights are working but the USB outlets aren't, is to check the 12-volt fuses. Now, in most of the modern campers, the electrical system has been standardized and the fuses are located directly underneath the power points and directly above the charger. These fuses are 15 amp blade fuses, and the best thing to do is to pull them all individually and check to see whether or not the fuses are still in working order. The color code here is that the red cable is the cable that comes from the 240 volt charger. The yellow cable is the cable that runs to the hot water service to provide power for the hot water service when it's running on gas. And the purple wire is the wire that runs around the camper to provide power for everything else. Be aware your AVan colours may differ depending on the year, make and model of manufacture. If in doubt, please contact a licensed auto electrician or a caravan repair centre to confirm what is what within your AVan. Now, I did mention that sometimes there is a third connector on the drawbar here. Now, sometimes you will see a red Anderson plug fitted on the drawbar. Now, if your AVan has been optioned with an electronic stability control, that is a module that will apply the brakes on either side of the camper in order to stop the camper from swaying, that is what the extra connector on the drawbar will be. I'm only making a mention of this at the end of the video, as not all AVans are fitted with that connector. That is a totally separate system, and it is optional. However, if you do have it fitted, it is a good idea to make sure that that is always plugged in. That ESC draws power from the tow vehicle, and you will need to make sure that you have an extra Anderson connector fitted to your vehicle to power that ESC. That concludes the video for the various power systems within the AVan. I hope this has given you a high-level overview of all the different power systems that exist within the AVan and how they all do or don't link together. In summary, your trailer plug runs the towing accessories for the vehicle, your lights, your brakes, those kinds of things, the things that are associated with moving the van from A to B. The grey Anderson connector on the drawbar, as wired standard, only powers the fridge on 12 volts. And the fridge, as standard, will not draw power from the 12 volt system in order to cool. Some modern fridges will require a 12 volt power in order to run the control panel, like the fridge that is located in our AVan, but it will not cool off the battery that is fitted to the AVan. Third, the 240 volt system. This runs all of your mains accessories around the van. Your battery charger, your fridge when it's selected to AC, your air conditioner, your microwave, your hot water service, etc. And finally, the 12 volt system within the van. This runs everything else. As I said, if you have a more modern fridge, it will run the control circuitry for that fridge, but not the cooling. It will run all of the lights. It will run all of your USB outlets. It's also what the solar is tied into. It does not and will never, unless you have an inverter fitted, power the 240 volt outlets. They will only work if your camper is plugged in. Finally, there is a fifth optional addition to the power system within the AVans, and that is a red connector on a drawbar that powers the ESC. This is an optional towing accessory that prevents the van from swaying in motion. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I hope this has been clear. If there's any questions that you have, please leave a comment below. Don't forget, like, subscribe, and share this video. If there's anything that you would like us to add, if there is anything that you would like to see us run a specific video on, please let us know and we can produce that content for you. I'm Josh with J&T's Journey. Thanks for watching. Cheers.